April 1945. Buchenwald concentration camp, Germany. Staff Sergeant Leon Bass of the 183rd Engineer Combat Battalion walks through the camp gates. He's 20 years old, a black soldier from Philadelphia. He's been in Europe for 6 months, building bridges and clearing roads for advancing American forces. Nothing in his training prepared him for what he sees. Skeletal prisoners stare from barracks. Bodies lie in piles. The smell is overwhelming. Bass and his unit are among the first American soldiers to enter Buchenwald after its liberation. They're engineers, not combat infantry, but they're here because they were nearby when the camp was discovered. The German civilians living near Buchenwald claim they didn't know what happened there. They say the SS kept the camp secret. Bass watches German citizens forced to tour the camp to see the evidence of what their government did. Some of the liberated prisoners approach Bass and the other black soldiers. One prisoner, a French political detainee, speaks some English. He tells Bass, "The gods told us you were coming. They said black American soldiers were savages who would kill everyone. That's why so many gods ran away." Nazi propaganda spent years warning Germans about black devils in American uniforms, depicting black soldiers as primitive, brutal, subhuman threats to civilization. The propaganda served multiple purposes: justify Germany's racial ideology, frighten civilians into desperate resistance, and reinforce the myth of Aryan superiority. When black American soldiers actually arrived in Germany in 1944–45, reality contradicted every element of the propaganda. Wehrmacht soldiers fighting to the death on the Eastern Front against Soviets surrendered quickly to black American units in the West. German civilians warned to fear black soldiers found them distributing food and providing medical care. Prisoners in concentration camps saw black liberators as proof that everything the Nazis told them was lies. This is why Nazi propaganda warned Germans about black American soldiers, and why that propaganda failed completely when confronted with the truth. If you want military history that shows how racist ideology collapsed when tested in combat, subscribe right now. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. This story reveals what happened when propaganda met disciplined professional soldiers. Nazi Germany's racial ideology places black people at the bottom of their hierarchy. Hitler's writings in Mein Kampf describe black people as racially inferior, incapable of civilization, naturally violent and primitive. This ideology isn't unique to Hitler. It reflects pseudo-scientific racism prevalent in Europe and America in the early 20th century. But Nazis systematize it as state policy. When America enters World War II in December 1941, Nazi propagandists face a problem, explaining how a racially inferior nation could threaten the Aryan master race. The solution is to emphasize America's racial diversity as weakness. Joseph Goebbels, Nazi minister of propaganda, directs a campaign depicting America as a mongrel nation, racially mixed, culturally degenerate, lacking the purity and strength of Germany. Black Americans feature prominently in this propaganda as evidence of American inferiority. Nazi propaganda posters distributed throughout occupied Europe show black American soldiers as ape-like caricatures with exaggerated features. The text warns, "This is what the Americans will bring: savage Negroes who will destroy European civilization." Radio broadcasts from Berlin describe Black American soldiers as criminals released from prisons to fight Germany. The broadcasts claim these soldiers rape, murder, and pillage wherever they go. The Americans are sending their worst elements to destroy Germany, the broadcasts warn. This propaganda serves multiple strategic purposes. Justify resistance. If black soldiers are savage subhumans, Germans must fight to the death to protect their families and civilization. Reinforce ideology. Black soldiers' presence in Allied armies proves Allied moral inferiority and validates Nazi racial theories. Divide enemies. By emphasizing racial issues in America, Nazis hope to create internal conflicts that weaken Allied war effort. Motivate civilians. Fear of occupation by savage soldiers encourages civilians to support total war policies. The propaganda intensifies as Allied forces approach Germany in 1944. Posters appear in German cities showing black soldiers threatening white women and children. Radio broadcasts describe atrocities allegedly committed by black troops in France and Belgium, fabricated stories designed to create terror. German military intelligence provides more objective assessments. Wehrmacht reports on American forces note the presence of segregated black units and describe their combat capabilities factually. Intelligence officers care about tactical effectiveness, not propaganda narratives. But propaganda doesn't target intelligence officers. It targets civilians and frontline soldiers who won't see classified intelligence reports. By early 1945, as Allied forces cross into Germany, Nazi propaganda has spent months conditioning Germans to expect the worst when black American soldiers arrive. Then, reality arrives. Black American soldiers enter Germany in March 1945 as part of the final Allied offensive. The 761st Tank Battalion crosses the Rhine River, attached to Patton's Third Army. The 92nd Infantry Division advances through northern Italy into southern Germany. The 183rd Engineer Combat Battalion follows frontline units, building bridges and clearing obstacles. Smaller units, quartermaster companies, truck battalions, medical units, move through Germany as occupation begins. German soldiers' first encounters with these units contradict everything propaganda promised. The 761st Tank Battalion engages Wehrmacht forces near Coburg in April 1945. German defenders, told to expect savage enemies, face disciplined tank crews executing coordinated combined arms tactics. The German company commander, captured after his position is overrun, expresses surprise. "We were told you were prisoners released to fight, but you fight like professional soldiers." This assessment is accurate. The 761st has been in continuous combat since November 1944. 183 days of combat operations in France, Belgium, and Germany. They've destroyed hundreds of enemy vehicles, captured thousands of prisoners, and liberated multiple concentration camps. They're veterans who know their job. When Wehrmacht units realize they're facing competent professional soldiers rather than primitive savages, their will to resist often collapses. German soldiers on the Western Front in 1945 increasingly choose surrender over suicidal last stands. Facing black American units provides no exception to this pattern. Private E.G. McConnell, 761st Tank Battalion, describes German reactions. "We'd take a town, and German soldiers would come out with hands up. Some looked confused, like we weren't what they expected.
One young soldier asked our translator if we were really Americans. He thought black soldiers must be from French colonies or something.
This confusion reflects propaganda's failure. Nazis depicted black American soldiers as barely human, but the soldiers German troops encounter are well-equipped, well-trained, and following the laws of war. German civilians experience similar contradictions. As American forces occupy German towns, military government units establish order, distribute food, and provide medical care. Black soldiers participate in these operations alongside white soldiers. In towns occupied by units with black personnel, civilians nervously watch these soldiers they've been taught to fear. What happens contradicts every propaganda warning. Black soldiers don't rampage through towns. They don't attack civilians. They distribute rations to hungry children. They provide medical care to wounded German soldiers. They follow orders and maintain discipline. A German woman in Bavaria, interviewed by Army historians in 1945, describes her experience. "We were told the Negroes would be like animals. Then they came to our town. They gave my children chocolate. They helped my husband who was wounded. I realized everything we were told was lies." This is the story of soldiers who faced an enemy's propaganda campaign, then defeated it simply by being professional. If you want military history that shows how discipline and humanity overcome ideology, subscribe right now. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. These soldiers changed German civilians' minds through their actions. The contrast between propaganda and reality is most stark at concentration camps. Black American soldiers participate in liberating multiple concentration camps in 1945. The 761st Tank Battalion helps liberate Gunskirchen, a subcamp of Mauthausen, in May 1945. The 183rd Engineer Combat Battalion enters Buchenwald in April. Elements of the 92nd Infantry Division reach camps in northern Italy and southern Germany. These soldiers witness the final evidence of Nazi ideology's consequences. Staff Sergeant Leon Bass describes entering Buchenwald. "We saw the crematoriums, the bodies, the survivors who were just skeletons. I realized this is what happens when you believe some people are less human than others. The Nazis said black people were inferior. They said Jews were inferior. They built camps to exterminate people based on those beliefs." For black American soldiers, the camps represent a profound irony. They're liberating victims of Nazi racial ideology while serving in a segregated American military that also operates on racial hierarchy. Less extreme than Nazi genocide, but still systematically discriminatory. Some survivors recognize this irony. A Jewish prisoner at Dachau, liberated by units with black personnel, later writes, "The Americans who freed us included Negro soldiers. I knew America had its own racial problems, but these men risked their lives to fight the Nazis. They saved us." German guards at concentration camps often fled before American forces arrived. Those who remained sometimes chose to surrender to black troops specifically, calculating that professional soldiers following laws of war were less likely to execute them than Soviet forces or vengeful survivors. This calculation proved correct. Black American soldiers, despite witnessing Nazi atrocities and facing years of Nazi propaganda depicting them as subhuman, maintained military discipline. Captured guards were processed as prisoners of war, not summarily executed. Technical Sergeant Edward Donald, 761st Tank Battalion, explains the thinking. "We saw what the Nazis did in those camps. Some of us wanted revenge. But we were soldiers, not murderers. We arrested the guards and turned them over to proper authority. That's the difference between us and them. This discipline undermines Nazi propaganda's final premise, that black soldiers were savage and lawless. The evidence shows the opposite. Soldiers maintaining professional standards even when facing the worst crimes in human history. Camp survivors spread word about their black liberators. Some stay in contact with the soldiers who freed them for decades afterward. Testimonials from survivors specifically mention black American soldiers and contrast their humanity with Nazi brutality. As Germany surrenders in May 1945, American forces transition from combat to occupation. Black soldiers participate in occupation duties, maintaining order, processing displaced persons, guarding supplies, rebuilding infrastructure. German civilians interact daily with American soldiers, including black personnel they've been taught to fear and hate. The propaganda collapse becomes complete during this period. In towns occupied by units with significant black personnel, German civilians discover that their new administrators and guards are the same black devils propaganda warned about. The disconnect between propaganda imagery and actual behavior becomes impossible to ignore. Black soldiers distribute food rations. They don't steal food from civilians. They provide it, often sharing their own rations with hungry German children. Black soldiers provide medical care. Military doctors and medics, including black personnel, treat German civilians and wounded soldiers without discrimination. Black soldiers maintain order without brutality. Military police, including black MPs, enforce occupation rules firmly, but follow military justice procedures. They don't engage in the random violence propaganda predicted. German civilians respond pragmatically. Fear gives way to relief. The occupation is strict, but lawful. Food is scarce, but distributed fairly. The savage Negroes of propaganda prove to be disciplined soldiers following orders and the laws of war. Some German civilians acknowledge being deceived. A schoolteacher in Bavaria writes in her diary, "We were told lies. The Negro soldiers are not monsters. They are men doing their duty, treating us better than we probably deserve." Others maintain racist attitudes despite evidence. Some Germans attribute black soldiers' discipline to white officers' control, unable to accept that black soldiers themselves are capable and professional. The propaganda's psychological impact persists even when its predictions fail. The U.S. Army's segregation policies complicate the picture. Black soldiers serve in segregated units under predominantly white officers. They face discrimination within their own military, restricted access to promotions, excluded from certain assignments, subject to harsher discipline for identical offenses. German civilians sometimes notice this contradiction. They see black soldiers treated as inferiors by white American soldiers, yet performing identical duties competently. Some Germans, ironically, begin questioning American racial policies while recognizing Nazi propaganda about black savagery was false. This complexity frustrates black soldiers. They've helped defeat Nazi racial ideology in Europe while living under American racial hierarchy at home. They're professional enough to maintain discipline in Germany while facing discrimination in their own ranks. Private First Class William Scott, 183rd Engineer Combat Battalion, captures the contradiction. "We're in Germany, occupying the country that said we were subhuman, but we still can't eat in the same mess halls as white soldiers. We liberated concentration camps built on racial hatred. Then we go back to segregated barracks. It makes you think." The failure of Nazi propaganda about Black American soldiers reveals broader lessons about ideology versus reality. Nazi Germany built its entire system on racial pseudoscience. The propaganda about Black American soldiers represented just one element of this worldview. When that propaganda failed, when German troops encountered competent professional soldiers and German civilians met disciplined occupation forces, it demonstrated the bankruptcy of Nazi racial theories. But this lesson didn't translate into immediate change in America. Black soldiers return home from defeating Nazi Germany to find segregation intact. They've proven themselves in combat, liberated concentration camps, and occupied enemy territory as professional soldiers. They come home to buses where they must sit in back, and restaurants that won't serve them. Some German civilians treat Black American soldiers with more respect during occupation than white Americans show them at home. This irony isn't lost on the soldiers. The experience radicalizes many Black veterans. They've fought for freedom in Europe. They demand it in America. These veterans become leaders in the civil rights movement, men who know they're as capable and deserving as anyone, who've proven it under fire, and who won't accept second-class citizenship quietly. Nazi propaganda about Black American soldiers also leaves a historical record that inadvertently validates these soldiers' achievements. The very fact that Nazis felt compelled to warn Germans about Black soldiers, to create elaborate propaganda depicting them as threats, suggests the Nazis recognized Black soldiers' capability even while denying it ideologically. German military intelligence reports, written for professional assessment rather than propaganda, describe Black American units factually. These reports note unit designations, equipment, and tactical patterns without the racist caricatures of propaganda posters. Wehrmacht officers preparing defensive positions care about American capabilities, not racial theories. Their reports acknowledge Black units as legitimate military threats. This professional assessment, buried in intelligence files while propaganda dominated public messaging, reveals what German military leadership actually believed versus what they told their population. Post-war, some German veterans acknowledge that Nazi propaganda about various topics, including Black American soldiers, was false. These acknowledgments appear in memoirs, interviews, and historical research. Former Wehrmacht soldiers describe encountering professional, capable Black American troops who contradicted everything they'd been told. These testimonials don't erase Nazi crimes or excuse German soldiers' participation in an evil regime, but they demonstrate propaganda's failure when confronted with reality. The broader lesson: dehumanizing propaganda works only until people meet those being dehumanized. Direct experience destroys false narratives. German soldiers and civilians conditioned to fear black devils encountered professional soldiers and discovered the propaganda was lies. The Tuskegee Airmen, 761st Tank Battalion, 92nd and 93rd Infantry Divisions, and thousands of black soldiers in support units didn't defeat Nazi propaganda with counter-propaganda. They defeated it by being competent, disciplined, professional soldiers who treated prisoners and civilians according to the laws of war, even when facing an enemy that violated every principle of humanity. That conduct, maintaining military discipline while liberating concentration camps, following rules of war while occupying enemy territory, treating German civilians humanely while those same civilians had supported a regime that deemed black people subhuman, represents a profound moral victory. Nazi propaganda warned Germans about Black American soldiers. What Germans discovered was soldiers who proved, through their actions under the worst conditions, that Nazi racial ideology was built on lies from the beginning.